Hello everyone, my name is Joel Justin Bright and today we will be going through the economy of Kuwait.
Here is a look at what we have before we start. Introduction. Kuwait is situated in the northeastern corner of the Arabian Peninsula. Bordered by Iraq, Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Gulf, Kuwait occupies a strategic position in this vital region. Kuwait is a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC. The country's crude oil reserves are approximately 8% of the world's total reserves. The country's oil industry accounts for nearly half of Kuwait's GDP. 94.4% of government revenues come from oil. Some history. At the beginning of the 18th century, Kuwait City was founded and the Al Sabah family became its first sheikh. In the late 18th and 19th centuries, the sheikhdom was in the fringes of the Ottoman Empire. The current system of government came about when Kuwait obtained British protection in the year 1897. In 1961, the British ended this protectorate, giving Kuwait its independence. But Iraq immediately threatened to occupy the area. Later on, Iraq dropped its claim when the Arab League recognized Kuwait's independence on the 20th of July 1961. Moving on to some history, oil was discovered in Kuwait in the 1930s and it proved to have 20% of the world's known oil resources. Ever since 1946, it has become the world's second largest oil exporter, and the sheikh, who receives half of the profits, devotes most of them to the education, welfare, and modernization of his kingdom. On July 1990, Iraq President Saddam Hussein blamed Kuwait for fading oil prices and invaded Kuwait. He set up a pro-Iraqi provisional government and drained Kuwait of its economic resources. A coalition of Western and Arab military forces drove Iraqi troops out of Kuwait in 1991, ending the Persian Gulf War. In 1999, the Amir gave women the right to vote and run for parliament, but later that year, the parliament defeated the ruler's decree. In 2003, traditionalists won a sweeping victory in the parliament election. In May 2005, Kuwait abandoned its 1999 ban on women's suffrage, and in June, a woman was appointed to the cabinet. In 2006, women voted for the first time. In 2010, Kuwait's parliament passed a 5-year $104 billion development plan that strives to upgrade Kuwait's infrastructure and diversify the economy away from oil. In 2015, Kuwait passed a new development plan that focuses on economic reform and the implementation of several projects that were not implemented under the preceding plan. Moving on, we discuss the culture. A variety of ethnic groups reside in this country and only around 40% of the population is Kuwaiti. And people from surrounding Middle Eastern nations constitute of 35% of the population. Around 60% of the population is male, while 40% of the population is female. The country has Arabic as the official language and English being widely spoken. The majority of the people follow Islam, but Christianity, Hindu, Farsi, and other religions make up the rest. Food plays an important role in the Kuwaiti culture. The most popular dish is the makbous, which is a chicken, beef, or fish over a specially spiced rice. There are small sandwich restaurants which sell sandwiches like falafels and shawarmas. These restaurants are called the Kuwaiti fast foods. Kuwait has a semi-Islamic constitution and alcohol is prohibited in Islam. Some people are outdoorsy and they like going to the beach or the desert. The family unit. Both Kuwaiti custom and law enforce the division of labor between genders. And unlike other Arabian countries, women are involved in various aspects of the labor force. Women are also gainfully employed, often in social services, in clerical positions, or as teachers. Women are prominent in the country's commercial life and in the civil service. Honoring tradition, many women still go veiled, but some younger generations don't. When you look at the domestic unit, we see that family is the basis of Kuwaiti society, and in accordance with Islam, both men and women have equal property rights. Looking at the education system, we see that all schooling for Kuwaitis are free. Between ages of 6 to 14, there is compulsory attendance. Higher education has only one university, but there are a lot of scholarships for Kuwaitis. When we consider this, we see that the majority of the people that we interact with will be Muslims, and the segregation of the gender roles are reduced the possibility of finding women in the upper levels of management. Country is home to a lot of foreign nationals, and therefore, as a business, we will have to keep in mind that we will be meeting all of these people. Moving on to the political structure, we see that the state of Kuwait is a constitutional emirate with a parliamentary system of government. Kuwait has gained independence from the British in 1961. Its constitution, which combines aspects of both presidential and parliamentary systems of government, was approved and put into effect in the next year. As we see the political structure, there is headed by the chief of state, the Amir, along with the crown prince. Under him, the Prime Minister, who is appointing the 16 cabinet ministers and 50 members of the parliament who are elected by the people. Together, these 66 ministers are the legislative branch. The voting rights are granted to adults of 21 years of age or above, but males who are in the military or in the police are not allowed to vote. When we look at all of this, we see that the Amir is very powerful and can dictate the entire form of government. So representation and control of its policies are also in his hands. Thus, we have to be mindful of his interest when we take long-term business concerns into mind. Here are some general statistics of Kuwait. Looking at the nature of the economic and business systems, we see that oil extraction and processing counts for 50% of the GDP, 95% of the export earnings, and 75% of the government revenues. Kuwait's economy suffered enormously from the effects of the Gulf War and the Iraqi occupation. Economic improvement from 1994 to 1997 came largely from the growth of the industrial and the financial sectors. Reversing this trend, the GDP shrank by 16% due to the large decline of world oil prices. The loss of it was more than recovered when the oil prices began rising half in the second half of 1990. The Kuwait portfolio of investment has generally served to double the income it receives from the basic oil industry. The GDP growth rate slumped into negatives in 2001 and 2, but quickly recovered in 2003 and in 2004, and then maintained a stability by the time it reached the current GDP growth rate of around 8%. Taking a look at the various sectors, we see that the country has only 5% land suitable for farming, and so Kuwait is dependent on a lot of international trade. Thus, the largest industry in Kuwait is the oil industry. To protect oil interests, the country was one of the founding members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. Throughout the history of Kuwait, it has also depended on trade, and today it exports 1.5 billion each year, and Kuwait imports 8.1 billion a year. The human resource factor is around 1.3 million people. Kuwaitis usually hold government jobs and own most of the businesses in the private sectors, and non-Kuwaitis generally labor in various businesses and in the oil industry. When we look at the land tenure, we see that many people live in urban areas because of the necessity of sharing spaces and resources in the desert. In the agriculture sector, only 1% of the total area of land is utilized for cultivation of crops. Permanent pasture makes up around 7.6 area. Farmers are provided with long-term loans and a lot of low-cost irrigation. When we look at the barriers for a new business, we see that Kuwait does not have any individual income tax. But in practice, foreign-owned firms and joint ventures are the only businesses subject to corporate income tax, which is a flat 15%. Government spending is 37.5% of the GDP, and public debt is less than 10% of the GDP. Oil revenues allow tax rates to be kept low and maintaining the government revenue. Kuwait's average tariff rate is only 3.9%. When we look at the banking and finance system, we see that prior to the early 1960s, there was no financial institution, so the businesses was carried with any individual corporation. But after the 1960s, Kuwait formally established the Kuwait Currency Board, KCB, and the development of a national currency was put in place. The Central Bank of Kuwait, CBK, replaced the KCB as the Kuwait's financial regulator in 1969, and the CBK nationalized the banking system to ensure that the economy was stable. Looking at the banking sector, we see that the Kuwait's banking sector is highly concentrated. According to the data from Camco, NBK is the single largest bank in Kuwait, KFH in the second place, followed by the Bulgan Bank, Gulf Bank, Commercial Bank of Kuwait, CMBK. Looking at the finance sector in Kuwait, the banking section is over half of the market capitalization in the Kuwait Stock Exchange, KSE. End of 2014, banks were the largest sector in the browse. Similar to the banking sector, NBK and KFH were the first and second largest listed companies in the KSE. Other companies that were listed were Ali United Bank, Bulgan Bank, Ali Bank of Kuwait, and CMBK. When compared to the US system, the banks are not independent and are a lot more localized. This means that they are easily influenced by the government. After the crisis of 2008, most banks today rest on a large amount of cash reserve as a result of heavy provisioning against bad loans. After the 2008 downturn, banking sector as a whole is currently well positioned to lend both individuals and businesses. While credit insurance in particular has grown over the recent years, government is also working to encourage additional lending to businesses. In conclusion, we see that the banking sector is widely expected to be very strong. In the foreseeable future, we see solid growth. All metrics for fiscal position remains very strong. Features and implications of the legal system. Shari or Islamic law is the main source of legislation. According to the permanent constitution, its political system is democratic. The legal system of Kuwait is an amalgam of British common law, civil French law, and the Islamic legal principles and Egyptian law. Kuwait's 1962 constitution drew on both Western and Arab models. However, women were not given the right to vote, and the freedom of association does not include the foundation of political parties. Kuwait's constitution combines the positive aspects of independent Arab state with a democratic style of government, when sovereignty rests within the nation, which is the source of power. The legislative authority is vested in the Amir and the National Assembly. The executive power is vested exclusively on the Amir and his cabinet of ministers. The constitution came into force on 1963 when the first Kuwaiti National Assembly convened. When you look at the system, we see that each administrative district of Kuwait has a summary court, and they are each presided over by a judge, and it deals with civil and commercial cases. High courts of appeal actually deal with civil and criminal cases. State security court decisions may be appealed to a cessation court. A 5-member superior constitutional court is the highest level of Kuwaiti judiciary, which interprets the constitution, and the military court handles the offences committed by military members and security forces. The religious courts decide on family matters, and there is a separate domestic court for the non-Muslims. The constitution gives authority to pardon and commute sentences to the Amir. But as this is essentially making the Amir above the law, I do not find this acceptable as it places one man above the law. Taking the implications into account, we see that the opposition is pressuring the government to address corruption, but the ruling family has obstructed the parliamentary efforts to investigate it. The legal system is not well developed, and the foreigners face difficulty enforcing contact provisions in local courts. As only citizens of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, may have land, businesses find it very hard to operate due to the hidden costs in the system. The judicial system tends to be very partial towards the Kuwaiti. Taking account of the ethical system, we see that the concept of Islamic work ethic, IWE, has its origin in the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad preaches that hard work causes sins to be absolved, and in what might be considered a complete departure from the thinking of that time, the Prophet asserted 4 issues. First, he presented work as the highest form of worshipping God. Second, he understood that work is not sanctioned if it is not performed to the best of ability. Here, Muhammad underlined 2 essential aspects of performance: quality and qualification. Third, work has a social dimension and meaning. It has to provide benefits to others. Fourth, it is through trade and active involvement in businesses that a society reaches prosperity and a reasonable living standard. A purposeful engagement in work is a cornerstone of the IWE. Such engagement facilitates personal and societal goals. That is, work is a virtue as it serves self and others. Spiritually, it is viewed as a creative involvement necessary for the establishing equilibrium in one's individual and social lives, while fulfilling duties and life towards God. The system with respect to the Protestant work ethic. A researcher, MacLean, signified the linkage between Protestant work ethic, PWE, and the need for achievement. Since then, researchers have shown an increasing interest in examining the relationship between work ethics and organization and social factors. One of them suggested that cultural work ethic facilitates economic development. Numerous researchers have investigated PWE and it correlates. They found that PW is highly correlated to justifying world beliefs. Some of them demonstrated a high correlation between IWE and individualism. Another studied the relationships between IWE and job satisfaction and organizational commitment and found strong correlation between these factors. So what are the implications of the Islamic work ethic towards business? Loyalty is a work-related attitude that is linked to work ethic. The link between work ethic and loyalty has evolved over the years. Classic work ethic has valued individualism and autonomy. The newer emerging corporations promoted obedience and docility as a form of loyalty and efficiency. That is, commitment to hard work implies strict obedience to managers' instructions. Developments in the 1960s and international competition, however, have introduced profound change in the work attitudes of management orientation. Work loyalty is no longer resolved only to obedience, but loyalty to the organization, profession, and immediate supervisor, among others. It appears to have gained acceptance and encouragement in the workplace. Considering the overall implications, we see that Kuwait is a complex business environment that requires flexibility, patience, and persistence. Many U.S. exporters and investors in Kuwait face challenges that exist in the other GCC countries, such as inconsistent and sometimes contradictory policies, lack of transparency in decision making, reversal of tenders once awarded, and a judiciary that heavily focuses on the local population. Careful planning and personal relations are crucial for success in Kuwait. Kuwait stands out as a unique place because it is expensive to do business there. The requirement to have a Kuwaiti agent for most business entities, the close nature of the oil production and the exploration sector, and the Kuwait's aversion to risk has resulted in slow progress for Kuwait. So, taking a look at the work demographic distribution table, we notice that the largest demographic is that the young men of the ages of 25 to 34 years of age, and thus most businesses need to target them. In conclusion, based on all the research so far, Kuwait is a great country to live and work in as long as you do not offend any of the locals. Setting up a new business is difficult without Kuwait's sponsor or a partner. And the law and the government is very partial towards the nationals and those who speak Arabic. Muslims are very favored, and due to a lot of nepotism, it is very hard to break the glass ceiling. And thus it is a great place to visit, but a very hard place to settle into, unless you are from a GCC country. Thank you for listening, and here's a list of references.